Hello, I hope you all got your coffee. I have some coffee here with me and my good friend Michael.
I have mine.
This is Michael McKibben.
Hello.
The valiant researcher, head of research at Americans for Innovation.blogspot.com. That's a tongue twister there.
I know.
And a major contributor to American intelligence media, aimfortruth.org. And he's the CEO of Leader Technologies and the inventor, the principal in the invention of what made social media possible by being able to expand the capabilities of the volume of people that could be involved in any single interaction on the internet. But he's been doing really tremendous research with his miners over at Americans for Innovation and digging up the backstory on what's been going on amongst the elites. And as many of you already know, this has been one of my pet subjects for about 45 years now.
Only 45 years?
And it took a Michael McKibben to come along and show me how it's done. I stumbled along all those years with these things called books. That's those square things that are behind me. And now I'm finding out that I'm driving in the slow lane. So how you doing there, Michael?
I am doing great. Every day I can get up is a good day.
Well, that's a Bob Dylan line. Every day above ground is a good day.
Yes. It's very biblical.
Well, it's pretty interesting what's been coming lately. And like I frequently say, although it keeps accelerating, is that every day you turn on your computer, because forget the TV set, but you turn on your computer and you realize that more stuff happened already by about 1 o'clock than usually happens in a month. And so good luck keeping track of all of it.
I know. Just yesterday, we were preparing the material for this latest post on the Marshall Plan, and lo and behold, we stumble onto the IRS financial reports for the Pilgrim Society from 2001 to current in the U.S. Nobody has put that forward until yesterday.
Wow.
And we have it all. And we've got some unbelievable revelations just out of what little information they had in those reports, which probably we'll talk about.
Well, they have their basically, here's the official Pilgrim Society, a centennial history, the Pilgrim Society of the United States, and here's the Pilgrims of Great Britain, both by the same author. And so just so people know who we're talking about, this is a society that was created back in 1902, 1909 of the elites. It was first brought together in London and then launched at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, in 1903.
About 6 months later.
Yeah. And that is basically the meeting ground of, they tend to target members of the State Department, Secretary of State, and diplomats. And that way the Queen is kind of standing over as the figurative head of the Pilgrim Society. And it's very much tied into the monkey business of Andrew Carnegie specifically, and Elihu Root, who I'm sure most of you have never even heard of, who's one of the most important people in American history.
Mm-hmm.
But consequently, for you to be able to find what you found regarding those records, that's like, I think I could pull that one up.
Well, you pulled up those two books. Those are their propaganda for their 100th anniversary. And they're very selective in the people they disclose that were members. Very selective. And I mean, it is useful information because they do disclose some of their people, but there's a lot of people they don't put in there, and we're discovering them thanks to a lot of very intrepid congressmen and senators over the last 100 years who actually started peppering the congressional record with other names, and in addition to some other researchers in Europe that have done a fantastic job.
Renee Wormser, Foundations, Their Power and Influence.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really important. And anybody can buy it. It came out in 1958. And it's interesting because here's a really relevant quote to what we're going to be looking at today. This is from the introduction. And it's... let me see. Let me get the right. Make sure I got the right thing here. Okay, report on the special committee to invest tax-exempt foundations. Okay, so that's the Reese committee. But here, this comment in an address at the University of Chicago in 1952. It seems to me that the ingenious legal creatures developed by tax experts to solve unusual social, economic, and legal problems of the past several generations will become Frankensteins, though perhaps benevolent ones. It is possible that in 50 or 100 years, that's now 50 years, a great part of American industry will be controlled by pension and profit-sharing trusts and foundations, and a large part of the balance by insurance companies and labor unions. But eventually, what eventual repercussions may come from such a development, one can only guess. It may be that we will see in this manner reach some form of society similar to socialism without consciously intending it. Or it may be to protect ourselves against the strictures which such concentrations of power can affect, that we might have to enact legislation analogous to the statutes of Mortmain, which centuries ago were deemed necessary in order to prevent all England's wealth from passing into the hands of the church. So the statutes of Mortmain was something that they had passed to prevent the acquisition of assets within the kingdom of Britain at that time, and so you see that it all spins around.
Pretty perceptive.
Yeah, really. I'd say that way back then, and now here we are. But if you look at what's going on in the news, and people are looking and going, "What is up with this?" But all you have to do is look at the doctrine of the Frankfurt School and the people that were tied into the different approach to communism that was developed by the Frankfurt School, led by figures like Herbert Marcuse, who's a critique of pure tolerance. So why would you not want to be tolerant? Well, what if somebody hurts your feelings? I mean,
off with their heads.
It's a movement of cultural deconstruction that was the disaffected communists that were in Frankfurt at Goethe College in Frankfurt University. And it's disturbing because Goethe would have hated it. But anyways, because of the climate at that time, and when they left in Germany in the 30s and all that, most of them were Jewish. So they bailed out and they came to America, and they established themselves as authorities in academia with their postmodern narrative and their basic strategies for deconstructing the system of wealth that had been created in the West. The whole concept of being able to lift oneself up by the bootstraps and the burgeoning middle class. And they wanted to have a centrally controlled society, and they were closer. They were disaffected with Stalin and with Karl Marx even, because they felt that it wasn't a political challenge, that it was a cultural one, and that they had to get into the cultural sphere to convince people that they had good ideas. And that's extremely troubling. But when you look out today on the horizon, what do you see? They're tearing down statues. They're going against venerable institutions. They're trying to remove everything that gives some semblance of identity to the American culture, the American people, and likewise in other countries. But when you get into this kind of approach, it's very challenging because they control the media. They have major movie and sports figures and entertainment figures all coming out supporting this narrative, knowing that they're involved in this kind of big club and you're not in it.
Well, that's exactly what they did in the Soviet Union. By the time I was working there, the communists had perfected their system. They had it worked out in 5-year plans, none of which worked. And food would regularly rot on the rail lines after a bumper harvest down in the Ukraine. And people were told what to do, where to work, whether they could go to higher education. The economy, the consumer economy, was totally centrally driven, and there were shortages all the time. Most of the time, the shelves were half empty, or they would have a surplus of one particular product that nobody wanted to buy. That happened a lot, and there was hoarding. And every time a new truck would come into town, people would go grab as much of the product they could and hoard it. And so we've seen this already. I've seen it up close and personal. Friends of mine lived in that environment, and I haven't talked with most of them lately, but I am sure they're saying, "Look, you guys have already seen this. What are you saying to those in America that think this was attractive? It's not attractive. It's dehumanizing, and who would think that somebody sitting in Moscow can know what everybody needs in a country with 11 time zones?" I mean, it's just so stupid.
Yeah.
And yet that was pushed. And the publishing was controlled. The newspapers were controlled. People had jokes about we're experts at reading between the lines, and it just went on and on. And I was even riding in taxis, these group taxis. One time when Brezhnev was speaking on the radio, and every young person in the taxi was making fun of him. And so there's this, and yet this was the oppressive KGB, and they had their thumb on the entire culture. And we see that coming here. It's the police state. They have different packaging, but it's the same kind of people, and they will end up with the same kind of result. We have seen this before. I think we need to start listening to those that are trying to talk to us from Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, because they have seen it, and they know you don't want to go there.
Yeah, there's the colloquial term for it today. I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt.
Exactly. Got the T-shirt, and some of my friends have the wounds and scars to show for it.
Yeah, well, you can look again. Another example is the Cultural Revolution that happened in China, where they just went and they blatantly destroyed everything that had any semblance of the previous order. Statues,
Same
books,
same people.
Yeah, it's the same mindset.
It's called the British.
Well,
the British. I mean, you talk about Frankfurt, but I really see they really got moving when they started bringing Lenin over to London in 1902, and the Pilgrim Society actually coached him and housed him in London.
Oh, no, without a doubt. We hadn't got that far in the narrative yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I moved it forward for you about 20, 25 years.
We're still setting up the visible
Okay. At least you didn't go back to the Hammurabi Code, John. Thank you.
Well, we haven't started talking about the invisibles. But yeah,
Okay.
if you look at, and you see, like, for example, just to take some very visible visages, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And you go, well, what do they have in common? Well, Chicago, that's one. And then you get into Bernadine Dorn, right? The weatherman, and her husband. And that's some very disturbing stuff, because you're getting into areas of activity and extremism in our country back during Vietnam War, which, who wasn't against the Vietnam War? It was a stupid war that was started really because we were supporting French rubber farms, in Indonesia, and consequently, when you get into a bill,
we're finding some new nuances on that, by the way, in this Marshall Plan.
Oh yeah,
among these people.
Well, yeah, of course. There's always levels of influence, discretion, power, control, and but it's generally the very self-same people that are involved in everything.
Well, you asked what's the commonality between Obama and the Clintons, and I would propose that it's the Pilgrim Society, and that all of these commonalities we see underneath that are various instructions that various people were given to act in certain ways. And of course, then they're going to associate with some of the same people. But I think that is one of the ways the propaganda machine has kept the average person in the dark about. We see connections here, but we don't see them. We don't take them far enough to be able to act upon them, actionable items. And I think that that's what we have seen now, is that this agenda goes way back before these people were even born. And they at some point made the choice to join this group, or were groomed into it, which is more likely with those two. And then they were just following orders. And it's the Pilgrims across the board. And I got to tell you, John, we know we have this. We found this tax return of the Pilgrim Society from last year, from 2018, and the current president of the Pilgrim Society in the U.S. is a guy by the name of Drexel the Fourth. I forget his first name.
Of course.
And he was the former managing director of Kidder Peabody, which that organization has now been sold to UBS in Switzerland, a Swiss bank. He's the president of the Pilgrim Society, and get this, he is a peer's not the word, but he's a life member of the Knights of Malta. So the Queen's got direct control of the Pilgrim Society in the U.S., and he is a prior emeritus of the English Priory of the Knights of Malta.
Well, I have their own official book here somewhere. I haven't been able to put my hands on it yet. It's really a nice book with a embossed red cross on the cover, and it's really they really do.
They have great graphics.
Yeah, they have bespoke costumes. That's what they say, as the Brits would say. And
so anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent on that, but the point is that the Knights of Malta are running the English Priory of the Pilgrim Society US, which has taken its orders from the Pilgrim Society in England, in London, and those are the people driving this bus. It's very clear now. The evidence is pouring out faster than we can process it. That's who we're dealing with here.
Well, it's and what makes it confusing for people, because I've had Brit guests on here, like I had Julianne from Eyes Wide Shut, for example. And, she is a dual citizen of the United States and Britain. Her husband's British and all that. And they had a hard time relating to it because, again, we're talking about cultural Marxism here. We're talking about the image of reality rather than the reality. Now, what Michael's talking about, that's the reality. But when you get into talking about how they project who they are and what they're doing, that's what gives them the power and influence that they have with the general populace.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that makes it even more difficult is that because of the way the British system is set up, there's a lot of advantageous things that happen to wealthy people when they become involved in these organizations. For example, like if you are a Knight of Malta of the Catholic ilk, you get a diplomatic passport, okay? Which means you can walk right through customs. They don't look at anything. Things like perks like that.
Mm-hmm.
With the Brits, they have just legions and legions and legions of trusts and financial instruments and all of this that's structured through their offshore banking system in the Cayman Islands, the Isle of Man, and geez, they're all over the place. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Guernsey, Bahamas, Hong Kong,
Singapore,
right.
So consequently, when you say how much is somebody worth, you have no idea, and everybody complains about Congress people and senators gaining millions of dollars. That's just their visible wealth. Okay, that's not their offshore wealth. We have no idea how much money could be tucked away with these individuals. And then you have the other side of the equation is corporations that use the invisible identity that Britain can offer to give the Queen the golden share, and then it makes it against the law for anybody to go against her wishes or look into the financial considerations and so on. So it becomes very, very challenging. Then when you get into what you were talking about, Tower of Basel, the secret bank that runs the world, and Adam Labor did a great job. And I'm going to read you just a really short paragraph to give you some idea of what this bank is. Tower Basel is the first investigative history of the world's most secretive global financial institution, based on extensive archival research in Switzerland, Britain, and the United States, and in-depth interviews with key decision makers, including Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve.
Oh, by the way, since you bring up Volcker, his name, John, let me stop you. His name shows up on the Pilgrim Society roster in their tax returns with Henry Kissinger in 2007 and 2008.
Yeah.
So they prepped for the bank bailout as officers of the U.S. version of the Pilgrims, and then jumped straight off, and then their buddies jumped back on again. So Volcker was orchestrating the bank bailout.
Yeah. No, this is, again, when you look at these things, and then you see the 11-day period to where people could close out certain financial instruments after 9/11 happened. Most people don't remember that, but they gave them this window. Okay, you got 11 days to close out these financial instruments, and just billions upon billions of dollars were moved around without the watchful eye of anyone. Well, let me continue here. Okay, and then there's Sir Mervyn King, governor of the Bank of England, and former senior bank for international settlements managers and officials. Tower Basel tells the inside story of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, the central bankers' own bank, created by the governors of the Bank of England and the Reichsbank of Germany in 1930 and protected by an international treaty. The BIS and its assets are legally beyond the reach of any government or jurisdiction. The bank is untouchable. Swiss authorities have no jurisdiction over the bank or its premises. The BIS has just 140 customers, but made tax-free profits of $1.7 billion in 2011 and 2012. So there you have one of their little cubby holes to where they can pull off a lot of these things. They have other institutions, but they're continually doing this financial chicanery. But what is important in our conversation today is that Michael has been able to do a reconstruction of some of the dealings of this cabal in the last 100 or so years that is beyond what I've seen. Mind you, I'm familiar with the work of Anthony Sutton, who did absolutely sparkling research and was able to point at the British and American role in being able to bring about the Soviets and also bringing about Nazi Germany and all that, and the funding. There's also James Stewart Martin, who wrote Honorable Men, and he was a guy who was actually sent over at the end of World War II, and his job, he was until 1947 director of the Division for Investigation of Cartels and External Assets in American Military Government, and he was sent over to break down the cartels in Germany. And when he got there, he became extremely frustrated because he couldn't do it, because so many of the cartels in Germany with Krupp and all the various munitions companies and all that were so intimately connected to American interests like Ford. And I mean, to this day, the principal manufacturing plants in Russia were built by Ford Motor Company. So there's this really complicated melange of financial interests that's above and beyond this whole political arena that people think they dwell in.
Yeah, so far everything you've mentioned is within the umbrella of post 1902, when the Pilgrims were formed, and they then by 1909 had formed the Empire Press Union, MI6, MI5. They took global control of propaganda, and that was very intentional, and they haven't given it up, and they have subsumed American media in the same effort. So the companies that were enriched were the ones that went along with this I would call it a Ponzi scheme, because these banks were just circulating cash through these companies, and they were sending that money back through the banks, and the rest of us were out there trying to make a living on Main Street. So I think that what we're seeing now with the list of companies on the Marshall Plan is the same list of companies that are attacking our president today.
Yeah,
some have dropped off.
You might want to give a little bit of cap of the Marshall Plan in case anybody listening doesn't know what you're talking about.
Well, George Marshall was the head of the what was his title? He was the chief of staff for the entire war. Eisenhower worked for him, and at the end of toward the end of the war, he started proposing that there needed to be some way of European recovery after we'd bombed the heck out of them and wiped all of the industries out and the economies out and the cities out. Then all of a sudden there's this twinge of morality, and we said, well, maybe we ought to recover them, get them recovered now. So bottom line is a Marshall Plan was developed and proposed by Dean Acheson and Stimson, who Stimson was the former between the two of them, they were both former secretaries of war or deputy secretaries of war. So all of a sudden, we have these secretaries of war proposing that we rebuild Europe. And so they formed a committee on their own without asking Congress. And then this was in 47. And then a month later, they went to Congress in a hearing that was 1,200 pages long. And they said we've got this groundswell of support from all segments of American industry. We want to help Europe rebuild. And here's the list. We've already got them done, and we're already started. We already started our work. So Congress was presented this fait accompli that you have to do this, and you have to give us they asked for the first number was 6.8 billion to start this pump to recover Europe. And he
in today's figures, that's how much?
I think it's about 11 times that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of money.
Continue.
So he proposed this list of about 300 people. And it's a list with most people you wouldn't recognize their names, but we've started digging into their names. We also have their companies that they work for. And there we have familiar names: ABC, NBC, not ABC, NBC, RCA, IBM, Westinghouse, Sylvania, Raytheon. Sound familiar list? These are the companies that were all raising hands to help Europe rebuild now that we had destroyed them. And it went on, and there were many labor unions, many universities, all of the usual suspects: Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, Wellesley College. And so now we know that list was suspicious. And so we've now deconstructed it. And by the way, that spreadsheet will be published here in probably the next few hours.
All right.
And so other people can look at that list and analyze it any way they want. We've broken it down by industry segment: who was in, what were they doing, what was their title, what other things didn't they disclose? And that's really the key point here. Yeah,
I just want to reiterate to people what Michael's talking about is americansforinnovation.blogspot.com. And on there, he has a massive database of primary documents. These are the downloads of actual documents that you can look at. Any of you want to do some mining, you can find stuff that we didn't find. I mean, we're doing this to encourage people to look under the hood, and the more people know, the more empowered we are. We're all about truth, and I like this approach because we don't deal with theories so much.
Right. Yeah, you can interpret you can have a different opinion about a fact, but the fact doesn't change.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the thing that we found is lacking in what we were trying to do, which in the beginning, as you've heard our story before, maybe we invented social networking, and then we watched and we sued Facebook. We proved that Facebook is infringing our patent, and then we watched the courts just circle the wagons around Facebook, and they made up all kinds of false accusations, didn't prove it, and yet the courts sealed it and signed off on it, and then we took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and Roberts wouldn't hear the case. We then found out after that all the judges, including Roberts, had mountains of Facebook financial interests. So that was our introduction into this world. Before that, I was out there building software and solving problems. I was not apolitical, but I was not that interested. And yet, once we started seeing all this misconduct, we said, "What's going on here?" And that led us to where we are now, what we've been talking about. So we've pulled back and we've looked at the context for why we were mistreated. And so what we found is not only us as inventors were mistreated, but inventors for the last 120, 130 years have been robbed blind by this same group of people who long ago figured out that control of patents was their way of maintaining permanent wealth. And so if you steal everyone's patents that you're interested in, and you get banks to fund you to profit off of these stolen ideas, then you can maintain permanent power. And that's what the Pilgrim Society was formed in 1902 to help do. They wanted to take over the world, but they needed a way to finance it and then a way to sustain their power permanently. And so there's a question: are there two tiers to our society? And I say absolutely there is. I didn't think that back in the day, but I do now. And there's the rest of us that try to work and be honest, and then there's those that steal. And those that steal have control of our government right now, by and large. I wouldn't say that's 100% true, but it's largely true. So what we want is a better America. We want an America like the one I thought we had, a republic, a constitutional republic, where the rights of the majority rule without violating the rights of the minority. But I digress. So we saw that this group of people started long ago to figure out how they were going to permanently rule the world. And, I don't think like that. John, I don't notice you think like that, but there are a lot of people in this world that really get off on power and wealth. And so that's the kind of people we're dealing with. And so we just kept digging. And one of the things we decided to do, to get to your point about facts, is being a civil engineer. One of the things I recognize is you can't build a good building on a bad foundation. And what I noticed a lot about the discussions of the pieces and parts of this story were less effective than they could, because you never heard anything but the person's opinion about a fact. You didn't see the fact. And I'm one of those guys that wants to see the fact. I find your opinion interesting, but if I can't see a verification of it, it's really hard for me to embrace it. And so what we started doing is, after the Supreme Court wouldn't hear our case and wouldn't protect us as inventors, we said, okay, let's just start digging for facts and seeing what they mean. And if we don't know what they mean, we'll put them aside and we'll come back to them later. And so over these years since 2013, we have been putting these pieces together, and now these pieces all fit, and all roads lead back to the Pilgrim Society back in 1902, with the preparations before that. And I would say most recently, we have to thank the coronavirus for all these latest revelations, because it was in looking at the origins of the coronavirus that we discovered this place called Pirbright Institute in London, outside of London, that pointed us to a Rothschild, a hidden Rothschild, Henry de Worms, and his mother was a Rothschild. And then somebody you had told us about, but we hadn't put the pieces together, was Lord Rosebery, who inherited the N.M. Rothschild stock from his wife in 1890. So we started seeing that all these things were connected, but we didn't see how. But those facts are now pieced together. They're telling us how they want to be organized. And what's coming out now with this Marshall Plan is bringing us to today. And it is definitely the group of people that have formed the society we grew up in, and the names that we're familiar with. And we now have, we see the sequence of events that got to that point that goes back to the turn of the last century.
Yeah.
And so the system, that way of doing it works.
Yeah, well, it's, again, going back to the thread that I did presenting the work from American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation over on Twitter. You can go to my Twitter account. I have it parked at the top. That's at John Barnwell 888, just like it says on the screen. And you'll see the Crowngate thread. And right at the top is a character, he's a baron, that's Mark Malloch Brown, who's an interesting character. And we were trying to figure out how, why is this guy in the mix, and he's really a tremendously important person. He was the co-founder of the Open Society Foundation with George Soros. So we thought, well, what's his link with the elites? But then when you get into understanding his wife, right, and that she's a direct descendant of the deputy governor of the Hudson Bay Company and a captain of the Honorable East India Company. And he was the governor of the Hudson Bay Company between 1822 and 1852, and a member of the Court Bank of England between 1822 and 1852. Elder brother of Trinity House, and he was created first Baron Pelly in 1840. So you go, the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. And so consequently, you get these characters and you start looking at them and you go, who is this person and how did they get in here? And we found, like, for example, the individual, I don't want to start digging into files right now, but there's all these characters that have key positions within social media companies that are members of and even presidents of the Privy Council of the Queen, and it's all totally interwoven, and all those details are presented on my Twitter thread and on Michael's website and on American Intelligence Media. You can look up Privy Council, Privy.
You're talking about Nick Clegg, aren't you?
Yeah, Nick Clegg.
Sir Nick Clegg.
Yeah, he's
and Baron Richard Allen.
Yeah. They have
two senior vice presidents of Facebook now.
Yeah, right. And so you go, well, how did they get in? And Baron Richard Allen of Halal. And if you look into his family history, then you see connections into the Tavistock Institute. And
yep.
It's always this same clique, Yep.
Well, it is. It's British aristocracy. It's the way they keep power.
Let's include the landed gentry, okay? Because it's a bigger club than the aristocracy. But if they play along with it, they end up becoming at least right.
Yeah, they can get invited, but it's a very exclusive club, and we as Americans we were not raised that way, but we have to realize that we have a whole East Coast crowd and some on the West Coast that really love that system. They love being stroked. They love having their ego stroked at dinners and banquets and getting awards and traveling here and there and sitting in meetings where they go here, and they just love that stuff. And the British realized that a long time ago. The Americans really were enamored by that, and almost what's the right word? They couldn't get enough of it.
Oh yeah, and it's look at the way people have really enjoyed like Downton Abbey. It's like.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's this period we're talking about.
Yeah, they keep forgetting that they're the people that live downstairs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the people that live upstairs. And when you start looking into that whole situation, you start seeing that there's certain dysfunctional characteristics that are so common, because you have the basically isolated upbringing of members of that class, because they're raised by nannies, and many times the nanny will be moved somewhere else, and so they're unable to develop the kind of lasting relationships that can bring about a wholesome childhood. And the parents might visit with them for half an hour or an hour at tea or something like that.
Oh yeah. It was a grooming system.
Yeah.
And then they go out to boys' schools and they had that system down. They know how to do what they're doing. and the British do it better than anybody. But like you say, it is dysfunctional and it's not American. And, they can choose to do what they want. But I signed up for a Constitution and a Bill of Rights that are not being enforced now. But what we now see is these pilgrims have so inculcated our government that all of those things we thought we had are pretty much have been stripped away by the attorneys by very clever wording in many of our laws and procedures and policies. And what we need to do is stand up as Americans who believe in the Constitution and put these people out. We've got to put them out. They're not going to change. They have to be put out, or they're going to put us out. One of the two.
Yeah, if you start looking at it, and they actually have a name for what is going on. It's called the Great Game, and it's playing geopolitics like a chess game, except that they're not on the board. What they do is they get two other forces in a Hegelian conflict, and that creates a cover so that nobody has the time, the energy, or even the inclination to look deeper. And that's their cover. And so you see that's how they conquered India. You say how, with such a small number of troops, and they weren't even British government troops. It was the East India Company.
I mean, in contemporary terms, that's called Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, exactly. And
talk about a non-conflict conflict.
Yeah, and when you get into looking under the hood of that, and you see Angela Davis, for example. Okay, Angela Davis was a extreme radical. And who was her mentor? Well, it's, again, Herbert Marcuse, who was one of the most important of the Frankfurt School, which, like he says, is a crowning development that came out of London, where they coached Vladimir Lenin to bring about the Bolshevik Revolution.
And Trotsky and Stalin.
Trotsky and Stalin. And Trotsky came here and ended up going to Mexico. And, it's so embedded in our culture that people don't understand that neocons are Trotskyites. Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? And you say, oh, wait a minute. Well, don't forget, okay, you got Bill Kristol, who is a frequent television personality, neocon, and all that. You go, well, who's his dad? Well, his dad was leader of the American Communist Party, Irving Kristol. Okay, you say, well, what is the agenda of the neocons? What is their agenda? Well, it's the acquisition of power. They were functionaries in the Republican Party for their own interests, but as soon as things started getting complicated and the power shifted to President Trump, then they want to move over and say, yeah, we're with you, but then when Trump gets in, what happens? We're not with you. And you've got like Bolton, who's kind of just a wild version of a neocon. He just loves to go to war. I'd love to see his offshore bank accounts. But consequently, it consists within a realm of the fog of war. And it's important to realize that the war never ended. Okay, the War of 1812, okay, is continuing strong as ever to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, that was Andrew, and that's what's so interesting, because President Trump put the picture of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office, and he was criticized for that because there's some really, like sad details about Andrew Jackson regarding the way he dealt with the Indians and all of that. But he was the last president before President Trump. Of course, you can include JFK, but he died trying to do it. And then you can include Theodore Roosevelt, but then who was his Secretary of State? Okay, but if you go back to Andrew Jackson, who was the original, he was the original as far as being for the public, and he went against the banks. That's what he did, and consequently, we're still struggling that struggle.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the War of 1812. That we've traced that back now to documents that show that was the moment at which N.M. Rothschild, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, made his first big move in England, and he was actually financing the British Army against when they were sacking the White House. And he made something over $1 billion just on those transactions alone. And that really set him off in motion. And before too long, he was coaching J.S. Morgan, Junius Morgan, J.P. Morgan's father. And he became the chief mentor of everything we know as the Morgan banking empire. Yeah. And he is to this day. So you're right. I mean, that plan to take over America has never stopped. And we see lots of discussions around Cecil Rhodes' time where they really were critical of King George and the way he handled it. But it was a little too late. And in fact, before Rhodes died, he was saying, well, look, we can even split the capital. We can have it half the time in London and half in Washington. I mean, he wanted it badly. Yeah. And
well, then you go, okay, so fast forward a little bit, and you get into the middle of the 19th century and the Civil War. And you see that there was financing in the South. The South was drawing finances from London, and the North was drawing finances, some from London, but also from Amsterdam. And so it's like, it's always these same concerns that are financed. Right. Oftentimes both sides, it's a famous story. There was N.M. Rothschild concern. That family were the ones that financed Napoleon, and they also were financing the British. And then when Napoleon got too big for his britches, they pulled their funding of Napoleon, and he found his Waterloo, and he lost, and so consequently, this is something, and you can't oversimplify. You can't say, oh, there's this one club. There is that one club, but there's factions within that one club, and they're all vying for pole position, shall we say. One of the buildings of the Pilgrim Society, it's interesting because they have a statue, and it has two guys reaching up and holding a torch together, right? But if you look at it, you'll see that one guy on the left side is British, the guy on the right is American. But who has the upper hand on the torch? It's the British guy.
Well, that is true. I mean, if you go to their pilgrimsociety.org right now, it advertises that it's the American version, but you go to the British site. Yeah. They're managing the American site from Britain. And now we know there's another little nuance that just came out from those tax returns, John. In 2001, guess who was the nonprofit entity that the Pilgrim Society was using as their organization in New York? Can you guess?
Oh, I can't wait. Tell me.
William J. Donovan Memorial Foundation. Seriously.
For those who don't know, that's Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS, which morphed into the CIA.
They were using that as their documents. So, and they give out an award every year, a William J. Donovan Memorial Award.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you about the Pilgrims' agenda relative to World War II and the CIA and spying and everything else? So all roads are leading back to a pretty small group of people. So when you say they all have factions, I don't see that. I see a unanimity that's unusual
Yeah, there is a unanimity because they've all agreed to work together, but they all have various theoretical models. Some are more militarily inclined, some are more culturally inclined. But yeah, they're on the same team. They just have, you can go and they love to brag about this stuff.
They want power. They want the United States.
Yeah.
That is their gem in their crown, the jewel in their crown.
It's a jewel in the crown because basically we're the most powerful nation state that's happened in the history of the world. And although they've been behind holding the strings, they're just holding the strings. It's like when Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. Was it Hirohito? He said, "I fear we've awakened a sleeping giant."
Mm-hmm.
Or it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't Hirohito. It's one of his.
Yeah, I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
And basically, that's what you have here because, again, this is the end result of Christian culture in the West. You could say what you want, but the founding documents in the United States are based upon all these developments in culture within the West over the last couple thousand years. And also previously before that, because they incorporated so much of what was the administrative structure of ancient Israel. So consequently, when you start looking at this and you see the details, you say, well, what are they using to get around that system? And you see that what they're using is extra governmental systems and structures and putting layers in that weren't, there was no provision for in the Constitution. Even corporations. Back in the time of Thomas Jefferson, a corporation was something that was created. Let's say they had to build a bridge. And as soon as they got done building the bridge, they would fold up the corporation and it no longer existed. Now we have these infinite corporations. Then you have elements of bureaucracy like the Senior Executive Service that we've done so much research on, that are close to 10,000 bureaucrats that are civilian generals, and the president can't fire them, but he can reduce their salary to $1 and move their office to Alaska. You know, and then there's the other various elements, and one of the most intriguing parts of your research is where you are able to unveil the ultra secret documents to the founding of the FBI.
Yeah.
That was kind of scary.
Well, some of that, the reason you didn't have it beforehand is because the only people that could see those documents 20, 30 years ago were researchers who got special permission. And then they were under all sorts of non-disclosures. And a lot of those documents came out relative to the Five Eyes creation in 1946. In the CIA and NSA and GCHQ, they released them at the same time about 10 years ago. And yet it takes a while to find those if you didn't know they were out there. But now we've got their signatures on documents, and we can see now the British drove that agreement. And by the way, that was done under the orders of General Marshall. So I'm not seeing Marshall as a very good guy. And he's had a lot of good PR, but he seems to be a prime mover within the Pilgrim Society for this post-war structure.
Well, see that's the thing is that when you get into looking at this, and it gets down to the issue that President Trump was trying to so clearly express, and he's a good example of American ingenuity. And here's something that is a testimony of that.
The Trump spa. Stone, I don't picture you in a spa. Why? Well, I just don't see it.
He is saying is Americanism, not globalism.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So consequently, these people that are in this Pilgrim Society, their vision has to do with the international state, And there's a little variations regarding the form in which that's supposed to take place, but it's largely settled into.
It's UN.
Why don't we?
It's the UN.
Well, yeah, but the corporations above the UN, really. And
well, it's the UN, and the corporations get the plum agreements and documents and contracts. So it's a fascism under the UN for certain corporations.
And that's why it was so critical for them to get this carbon credits fake global warming nonsense, because that was to be the funding, so that the rich people wouldn't have to finance it themselves, but it could actually pull its own weight, and then the UN would have the funds necessary to build their own military presence. And if Hillary Clinton won, we would be members of the North American Union that was scheduled to have a capital in Chicago. As we know, the most harmonious city in America, Chicago. I've heard that Chicago is an Indian word that means place of bad smells, because of the sulfur. That right. Chicago smelled like a city before there was a city there, because there's the sulfur deposits in the ground. Mm-hmm. And I've heard Hillary Clinton has the smell of sulfur. So Mephistopheles probably really likes Chicago, but that's a whole nother story. So had we become the North American Union, you see that part of this strategy is overcoming nation states by creating regional bureaucracies, thereby putting in the hands of bureaucracy, much like with the European Union. The biggest complaint that Brits had, the citizens or subjects, depending on you could be either one. It's not all the same. I found out. And I told Julianne Davis that she was a subject, and she looked it up, and no, she's a citizen. So it was in the 1980s. They created new classifications over Britain. You could be a citizen now. You don't have to be a subject. But there's still plenty of subjects over there. But consequently, when you look into this and you see that what was going on was that you had faceless, nameless, unelected bureaucrats in Brussels making decisions about commerce in the UK. And so fishermen, for example, couldn't fish off the shores of their own property because that had been designated to Norwegian fisheries. Because again, these regional divisions were going to make the determination as far as what kind of activity was going to take place. Like China's, that's manufacturing. U.S., remember, they slated us to be a service economy, and so they moved all of our manufacturing out of here, most of it. And now with President Trump, it's starting to come back, and so I think this is the most important election we've ever been through. Somebody said to me the other day, have faith in President Trump. I said, no. I have faith in God. Right. I have hopes for President Trump. So I hope that he can get the right information soon enough to make the right decision, because given that he receives the right information, he tends to do the right thing once he finds out what's going on.
Yeah, he seems to have good instincts, and we pray for him to have wisdom.
Yeah.
And so I'm always, I try not to draw conclusions too fast when I don't see things happening that I would want or expect, because he's got more information than we do. So we have to trust that somebody with good instincts, like you say, with the right information is going to be making good decisions. We just don't see how that's going to play out yet.
Yeah, timing is everything. And way back 4 years ago or so, I did a podcast with Douglas Gabriel from American Intelligence Media. And he asked me that question, and I said, well, there's a lot of things that President Trump wants to do he's not going to be able to do until he gets to the second term, where he doesn't have to worry about re-election. And I think that's still key. And I think that there's also the aspect of that he has to put enough people in place so that there's actually a follow through.
Yeah, got to get rid of those SES people.
Yeah, and
I mean, it's obvious.
Corrupt judges now. He's appointed more judges than any president up to this point, And so he's doing what he can do because, mind you, if you start trying to do a follow through and prosecute somebody or have something handled in the courts, and then all of a sudden it gets transferred to a venue,
right?
That's receiving money from
blank.
Right. I mean,
that system is broken as badly as one could imagine.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're going to appoint some new people that are going to be new blood, I don't know. To me, the legal system, and especially the legal education system in our universities, is all part of this feeder system. And one would hope that there are moral people in it, but it's like an alcoholic family. When you're around an alcoholic all the time and you have to deal with that person, you then adapting your behavior to their bad behavior. And as a result, then the whole family becomes dysfunctional. And that's what I see in our justice system. Even the guys that are good guys have adapted to the dysfunction, and therefore they are dysfunctional. So can that be fixed? I don't know. I don't think just appointing judges is going to do it.
Yeah, no, that's one aspect. The second level of it was even addressed in a congressional hearing when they were asking Barr about the viability of military tribunals. And so there is that, but then there's also, you have to remember that Barack Hussein Obama's favorite pastime was firing high military officials and putting in people that were going to do his wishes or that shared the opinions of him and his handler, Brennan. And so consequently, it's difficult at best, but that's the world in which we live. But part of the beauty of the American system is functioning according to how it was intended. It has a system of checks and balances to prevent the centralization of power. The biggest challenge facing mankind is centralization of power.
Right. That's always has been. So we talk about this controlled economies. We've seen this movie before. It was called the Old Soviet Union. This is exactly what they did. It all ran from Moscow, and everybody was told what to get, when they could get it. You want a car, you got to wait 10 years, 8 years, stuff like that. I mean, and I have seen this up close and personal. It's not a place we want to go, but it seems like there's a lot of people that just theoretically want to go there. And I hope we're not destined to repeat these lessons.
The crazy thing about this is that the people that are promoting trying to bring this revolution in society that are votaries of Bernardine Dorn and all of
the Students for Democratic Society and the
Democratic Society, all the
Black Panthers and the
when
remember all those.
Yeah, well, remember the SA in Germany were the ones that helped Hitler come to power, and it was called the Night of the Long Knives, and they went and they killed all of them. Why? Because, they were the people that were capable of overthrowing the existing regime. So, they got us in, but they're a threat. So we have to get rid of them. So these people that are promoting this change in society, they're going to be the first to go. I mean, really.
Yeah. Could be. I don't know.
Well, that's the way it worked in China. That's the way it worked.
Well, right now it seems though that it's largely propaganda driven. So we're talking about a lot more people are probably would say unwittingly supporting the agenda. I don't think they're going to wipe them all out, or maybe they will with vaccines. Who knows? But we've got to me, we're on a knife's edge. from what I have experienced in my life. This scene is just a little bit different this time because of things like 5G and the total control of global communications, most of which really got its impetus in after the Marshall Plan, when AT&T and RCA and NCR and Westinghouse and Sylvania and Raytheon all went over to Europe, raised their hands, said, we'll help you rebuild. They rebuilt it all, made sure they had all the back doors in. So we've got a global communication system that these guys have at their fingertips. That's a new situation. That we've never seen that in the history of the world. So how that's going to play out, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But again, what people need is they need information, action-based information, to where they go, well, what can they do in the face of all of this? This isn't like, go get your popcorn, we're going to entertain you.
Right.
We're trying to provide you with actionable information that's based on solid sources, so that hopefully people will get involved. And because we do have a recourse, we have
absolutely
a possibility of nullification, we have replacement of politicians. But the system, it's so corrupt that we're hoping to reach a tipping point to where
there we start believing in miracles. We start believing in the movement of God in people's lives to cause repentance, to cause them to change their minds, and the power of the Holy Spirit to do things that we could never have expected. And I've seen that over and over again in my life, and that's what I believe in now. I think that if we just look at it from a hard reality standpoint, this is a pretty big mess. But from God's perspective, it's another day, and miracles do happen.
Yeah, and that's why we're here. We're being given an opportunity to go through this and come out on the right side of the equation, even though these forces of falsehood may win for a time, because they're serving the prince of darkness. They have but a shadow of the reality. They don't have the reality. And Rudolf Steiner was very clear when he made the point of that the ideas that people have regarding certain systems and certain solutions that they may have to socioeconomic situations, that these ideas would be effective only to the extent that they participated in truth.
Right.
And so consequently, the longevity of any scheme that somebody comes up with, if it's based on a house of cards of just fake stuff,
right,
it's not going to last too long. And
I believe that.
Yeah, but that then again, going back to the research that you did with voting machines, that's very, very critical research when you realize that Mark Malloch Brown, who we talked about earlier, and George Soros are owners of a very critical infrastructure in the voting system.
Yep, they've got the back doors. And as far as I'm concerned, being a person in technology, I think the best system would be back to paper ballots and putting the ink on your finger, and the citizens running our election systems, not paid political professionals.
Yeah, not Bill Gates.
No, well, not even secretaries of state.
Yeah,
this is a citizen's activity.
Yeah,
not a political activity.
Secretaries of state, that's one of the major areas of contribution in the last election by George Soros, was contributing to the campaigns of secretaries of state.
Well, of course. They're running our elections. They've got their hands on the electronic data. They've got the system where they pretty much where they want it. They haven't got it totally perfected. It's any kind of complex system like that is going to have problems. And so I think that's what they've experienced. But as far as I'm concerned, the only real system has got to be paper ballots and bipartisan, unbroken chain of custody. Therefore, we count the votes, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, and those people carry that vote all the way to the state house and log it. then we don't have a problem. Then we can trust the system because we've seen our citizens protect our vote by a bipartisan, unbroken chain of custody. It's not difficult.
Yep.
And it is with electronics. You cannot trust electronic voting, period.
Yeah.
If a human being wrote a piece of software, it can be hacked and it can be tampered with.
Well, I mean, come on, it was a 12-year-old girl that was able to hack into a voting machine in less than 15 minutes at one of those tech brands.
Yeah.
Using her smartphone.
Yeah. And most people think, well, that can't possibly affect the whole election. But the point is, it's a lot of different things. It's not one thing. And then the man in the middle problem is the big macro problem, the strategy problem, because you can just take a whole, but what has Stalin said? I don't care who votes. I just care who counts the vote.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem we have. And we've got to have that as a citizen's property. It's not a property of the government or an elected official. So, and that's what we've got to take charge of.
Yeah. People out there, because I get this often. Okay, well, I hear all this stuff you're saying, but I feel like overwhelmed. What can I do? Well, in around 100 days, we're going to have an election. And what we've just been talking about is the most important thing on your desk today, is look in to see what you can do, if anything, in your local region to try and protect the integrity of voting. Mind you, one of the main reasons they have this whole thing going on here with all of this nonsense is so that you can't go vote. Oh, I'm sorry, we have to do it online. Well, don't worry, we'll have Bill Gates.
Yeah.
We can count them for you. So that's what we got.
Don't get me started on masks.
Yeah, start breathing carbon dioxide and you won't know who to vote for. Since we're here, it behooves me to let people know, to help me pull this wagon along. I have 2 books available on eBay. This is my second book, The Arcana of Light on the Path. It's a meditative guide. And this is Arcana of the Grail Angel, the spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner on the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. So you can find them there if you're willing to riddle through something that you're not going to understand right away. The whole point of it is that you don't understand it right away. And by having riddles, that's the secret of the Grail. Having a riddle so that you can riddle about whom does the Grail serve. And if you want to be further supportive or buy me a cup of coffee, you can go to paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And that being said, don't forget to check out Michael's crime line. How many years now is it?
Since 2012.
It's 2012, which was a big year for crime, by the way. I mean, there's some really key things that happened in 2012.
Yeah.
But go to Americans #4 Innovation, americansforinnovation.blogspot.com, and you can source primary documents and links to the highest levels of interaction you're going to find on the internet and save you a lot of time. I've contacted some of the luminaries in the world of citizen journalism. Of course, they tend to kind of blow me off, like why am I talking to you? I don't know. I've only worked on this for 45 years. You've been doing it, what, 3 years, 4 years? Anyways, we have to stuff all that personal stuff because what we're trying to do is far more important. I'd like to see that there's a world, a safe world ahead for our children, to where they have the freedom to be a human being.
Absolutely.
And that's my motive. And Michael, I can't thank you enough, and for you and Kyla and Douglas Gabriel over at American Intelligence Media, leading the charge to get fact-based information going, because there's so much theoretical stuff going on, and it can tend to get obfuscated. And so that people get caught chasing trails of flat earthers and all kinds of goofy nonsense. By the way, the earth is not flat. Just in case you're wondering.
Oh, okay. Thanks for sharing. I was wondering.
And the earth doesn't go around the sun. It's chasing it, by the way. Chasing it.
Now you're getting off into rabbit trails, John.
Well, yeah, but I can prove it. Anyways, so again, thank you so much. And,
you're welcome.
And don't forget to hit like, and don't forget to share this with people, because the more people get access to this information, the greater the chance of us finding somebody that's actually going to try and do something about it. So thank you all so much. And for those that have contributed up to this point, thank you again.